Tap. Malik's noise-canceling headphones snapped off his ears before he even registered the movement. He looked up to see a tall Vista Air flight attendant, Darla Quinn, standing over him with crisp precision in her posture and a hard edge in her voice. "You need to remove those headphones now," she commanded, her words sharp enough to cut through the hush of first class. He swallowed. In his lap lay the only gift he had left from his mother, who had died on this very route a year ago when medical help was delayed on a flight. He barely whispered, "I'm not playing anything. They're just noise canceling." Darla's eyes flicked over him with undisguised impatience. "Protocol is protocol," she replied coolly. "Off they come." Malik's fingers trembled as he peeled the headphones away and dropped them onto the seat beside him. He kept his eyes down, willing himself not to flinch under the weight of dozens of silent stares. A woman in a cashmere sweater glanced at him, eyebrows raised. A businessman 3 rows back scrolled on his tablet without looking up. Nobody offered a single word of support. He pressed his palms against his legs, tasting the bitter rush of humiliation. Every heartbeat echoed the memory of his mother's absence, her last moments spent pleading for help just outside this cabin. But he didn't cry. He didn't argue. Instead, he folded his hands, straightened his back, and met Darla's gaze when she turned to leave. Malik's heart slowed. He reminded himself that staying calm was his only shield. He had paid for this seat with his own savings, and he belonged there as much as anyone. But in that suspended moment, surrounded by plush leather and hushed luxury, he felt more exposed than ever. He picked up his phone and typed a single line to his brother. They did it again. No emoji, no complaint, just a quiet alert. As Darla's footsteps faded, Malik exhaled and stared out the window, where clouds drifted below. He let silence do the talking, because sometimes the loudest power move was saying nothing at all. Malik zipped his headphones into his backpack, the soft click somehow louder than Darla's clipped footsteps. He'd learned long ago that arguing never changed her mind, or theirs. He slipped the pack under the seat and sat up straighter, folding his hands in his lap like he'd seen his mother do when she tried to stay calm under pressure. Just then, Darla paused mid-aisle, glancing back with that same cool detachment. "Next time," she said without lowering her voice, "don't show attitude." Her tone was casual, like she was offering style advice, not stripping a teenager of his dignity. Malik kept his gaze forward, his jaw tight. He could feel the weight of every passenger's stare. The banker in a navy suit tapping a pen, the elderly couple sharing a crossword puzzle, even the little girl in 2B who peeked over her safety card, all perfectly still, as if they'd rehearsed indifference. He imagined their thoughts. "Not my problem, she must have her reasons." The silence pressed in around him, heavy as the leather seat. He remembered the day his mother, Dr. Naya Townsend, died waiting for a medevac shuttle on this same plane, how her last words had been muffled by noise and chaos. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, sightless except for the memory of her hand brushing his cheek. A man in a gray blazer 2 rows back leaned forward, lips pursed, eyes narrowing at Malik. But even his disapproval felt passive, more curiosity than compassion. Malik's throat constricted. He didn't want their pity. He wanted someone to say, that wasn't fair, to speak up. But no one moved. He lifted his chin, let the silence become his answer. He wasn't invisible. He was observing, storing every glance, every half-whisper, every dropped eyebrow. In that quiet, he gathered his resolve. If words wouldn't matter here, then his silence would. It would swell into something louder than any protest. Darla turned away, satisfied. Malik exhaled slowly, the tension easing into a spark of something fierce inside him. He might not speak now, but this moment was etched into him. Fuel for the reckoning he would bring. One quiet move at a time. The galley door swung open and Darla Quinn paused there, repressing a smirk as she addressed a junior attendant. "Did you see that kid back there? Thinks he can ride first class like he belongs." She straightened her cap brim, voice low but dripping with superiority. "Yeah," the younger attendant replied, eyes downcast. "I saw." Darla's gaze snapped back to Malik. She swept down the aisle with purposeful steps, each click of her shoes echoing against the carpet. Passengers shifted in their seats as she passed, as if her presence demanded deference. Malik felt every eye flick to him, some curious, some barely concealing approval, until they caught Darla's steely glare and looked away. At his row, Darla stopped abruptly. She produced a slim laminated card, the airline's authority to verify, a bureaucratic talisman. She flipped it open and held it under the cabin light. "Your ticket," she said, tone flat. Malik nodded, sliding the boarding pass from his jacket pocket. Her fingers closed around it, fingertips brushing his hand. It felt like a message. "I own this space." She inspected the pass with exaggerated slowness, reading aloud. "Malik Townsend, first class, seat 1A, paid in full." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Yet here you are," she said softly, "acting out of place." Malik's skin prickled with cold fury, but he didn't flinch. He felt a familiar knot in his chest, the same helpless ache he'd carried since his mother's last flight. He remembered her voice. "Keep your dignity even when they try to take it." He offered a small, polite nod and reached out to reclaim his ticket. Darla tucked the pass into her pocket without a word of apology. "Thank you," she said, tone syrupy. Then she pivoted sharply, turning her back on him as if the matter was settled. But to Malik, nothing felt resolved. He watched her go, the authority card glinting in her hand. He saw more clearly than ever how Darla cloaked prejudice and procedure, wielding rules like weapons. And in that sharp realization, his silence turned to determination. He sat back, eyes forward, heart steady, knowing that control lived in restraint, and this fight was far from over. Malik leaned back into his seat, the soft hum of the engines doing little to soothe the tightening knot in his chest. He glanced to his left. A woman in a cream cardigan peered over her newspaper, lips pinched, but made no move to intervene. To his right, a white teenager 2 rows down bobbed his head to music through identical noise-counting headphones. No reprimand, no interruption. A hush settled over the cabin, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy, like a net pulling him down. The overhead bins rattled as a flight attendant stowed service trays, but not one passenger offered Malik a glance of concern. Their eyes skimmed over him, curiosity turned cold. He was alone in a bubble of judgment. Every silent stare another brick in a wall. He pressed his hands together, remembering how his mother used to hold his fingers after her rounds at the community clinic. She'd taught him compassion, to notice when someone needed help. Here, though, compassion was on mute. He watched the white teenager settle in, pull tight the headphones, and disappear into his own world without consequence. The contrast burned deep. Malik's every breath was an open display. The other kid's freedom went unquestioned. Behind him, a businessman in a charcoal suit whispered to his companion and pointed subtly. They chuckled, then turned back to their stock tablet as if they'd joked about the weather. An older couple ahead exchanged a knowing look. Sympathy or disdain, he couldn't tell, but they remained motionless, heads bowed. Malik closed his eyes for a moment, letting the injustice sink in like slow heat. He felt the memory of his mother's last flight flicker, her fragile smile as she thanked the nurse who finally helped her. Too late. He straightened his back, lifted his chin, and let the silence swell around him. If no one would speak up, his silence would speak volumes. As trays clinked and hushed conversations resumed, Malik's resolve crystallized. He wasn't here to be invisible, and he wouldn't fade away. One day his quiet would roar back at them, but for now, he would store every detail, the looks, the whispers, the indifference, and use it as fuel for the reckoning to come. Malik shifted in his seat when his phone buzzed. No vibration this time, just a silent ping. He glanced at the screen. A text from LaDonna Price, his godmother and the silent power behind Townsend Terminal. The message read, "Vehicle 7 will meet you at Gate 12. Sit tight." He paused, heart skipping a beat. Gate 12 was the private exit, reserved for VIPs, an enclave most passengers never saw. A strange comfort washed over him. All flight attendants, crew, and even a few pilots respected that gate. It was where he'd once watched executives glide through glass doors, unaware that their world was also defined by privilege. Malik tucked the phone away, pressing his palm against the windowsill to steady himself. He'd long kept his relationship with LaDonna a private secret. To the world, he was just another teenager on his first solo trip. But LaDonna, whose quiet investments controlled the runways of half the state, knew exactly who he was. Behind him, Darla Quinn's footsteps faded. Malik allowed himself a small exhale, the tension loosening in his shoulders. He thought back to the first time he'd seen LaDonna stride through Townsend Terminal, everyone parting like water at her approach. He'd been 12 years old, wide-eyed imagining her words could move mountains. Today, her text was proof that those mountains could move for him too. He lifted his gaze to the seatbelt light still glowing overhead, a reminder that rules existed, until someone chose to bend them. A flight attendant passed by, offering water to the couple in 2B but ignoring his empty cup. Malik watched the tray clink shut, his silence now a guarded secret. He folded his hands over the text, letting the words ring louder than any protest he could voice. As the plane settled into cruising altitude, Malik closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you." It was the first time he'd allowed himself to feel seen today, a quiet acknowledgement that he wasn't entirely alone. And despite the cold stares and hushed judgments, he knew one thing for certain: help was coming, and in that promise lay a fierce kind of hope. Malik barely had time to settle back when Darla reappeared, her crisp uniform skirt swishing with purpose. She planted herself at the end of his row and folded her arms. "Sir," she began in that same measured tone, "I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to deplane." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your behavior," she said, voice low but carrying to every passenger, "has been deemed a potential safety risk." Heads turned. A murmur rippled through first class, soft gasps and whispered speculation. Malik's pulse hammered, but he kept his voice calm. "I've been sitting here quietly this entire flight," he replied evenly, meeting her gaze. Darla's lips curved into a thin smile. "That's exactly the issue. Non-compliance is as much a risk as aggression." She signaled to the purser, a tall man in a navy vest who approached with a clipboard. "Miss Townsend," he said to Malik with faux courtesy, "I need you to come with me for further assistance." Malik's fingers trembled as he gathered his jacket. He felt a flicker of panic, but he forced himself to stand tall. He straightened his shoulders and said, "I didn't protest or raise my voice. I followed every instruction." The purser cleared his throat and glanced around at the silent cabin. "Our priority is safety. We can't compromise protocol." Malik allowed himself a single deep breath. He looked at the other passengers, some watching curiously, some turning away in discomfort. He saw their silent complicity and remembered his mother's words, "Stand your ground with grace." Without another word, Malik picked up his backpack and followed the purser down the aisle. He didn't shuffle or hurry. He walked with deliberate calm. Each step echoed against the carpet, a quiet protest to the injustice unfolding. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back, locking eyes with Darla for the briefest of moments. Her expression flickered, surprise, perhaps even guilt, before she turned away. Malik stepped onto the jet bridge with his chin held high, leaving behind the hush of first class and carrying forward something far louder than any words. Malik followed the purser off the plane, each step echoing down the jet bridge. The stale scent of recycled air gave way to the faint hum of luggage carts and distant announcements. He braced himself for security's prying eyes, but instead found LaDonna Price waiting at the bottom of the ramp, her silhouette framed by the terminal's glass doors. Her navy coat brushed her ankles, and her posture was impossibly calm. She offered Malik a single nod, then turned to the purser. "Thank you," she said, voice low but unmistakable in authority. He hesitated, clipboard in hand, before stepping aside. Malik's heart pounded. LaDonna didn't smile or introduce herself. She simply extended one hand to guide him down the corridor. They moved past stunned passengers and curious crew members. No cameras, no drama, just the soft tap of her heels on tile. 5 minutes later, they reached a private security office. LaDonna stepped inside, Malik just behind her, and closed the door. He leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath as she pulled out her phone. There was no fanfare, no furious shouting. Instead, she dialed a single number. "Xavier," she said when the line connected, "activate the freeze." A pause, and then, "Understood." Malik watched her face, unreadable yet resolute. He knew exactly what was happening. All 3 Townsend terminals across the state would instantly suspend Vista Air's gate leases. No public announcement, just a silent project freeze, shutting off a $320 million 0-cents deal with unilateral finality. She slipped the phone into her coat and turned to him. "Let's go," she said softly. As they emerged back into the terminal, Malik glimpsed the purser watching from behind frosted glass, brow furrowed, but by then the decision had already rippled through executive channels. Within the hour, Vista Air's operations desk would light up with red alerts and urgent memos, panic rippling through the system. Malik felt a surge of something like relief, mixed with awe. No confrontation, no spectacle, just a mother's legacy wielded like the sharpest blade, cutting through injustice at its root. And in that silent moment, he realized, real power doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply whispers, and everything bends in its wake. Back in the Vista Air Operations Center, alarms blinked red across multiple screens. A coordinator's fingers hovered over the hotline, then froze. Reports streamed in. Lease suspension activated on Gate 3, 5, and 7 at Townsend Terminal. $320 0-cents M revenue stream offline. Urgent board meeting requested. In a glass-walled conference room, CEO Vanessa Clark stared at the live feed. Her executive team sat tense around the table, papers and tablets scattered like battlefield maps. The room was silent, too silent, until Clark's phone chimed with an internal memo. Immediate halt on all Townsend operations. Await further guidance. Clarence's lips pressed together. She looked at her CFO, who avoided her gaze. Stocks were already dipping. Screens showed graphs marching downward in real time. A VP whispered, "We've never seen a shutdown this fast." Outside the room, employees huddled around monitors, trading rumors in hushed tones. One junior analyst popped his head in the door. "Ma'am, the freeze order cites potential reputational risk tied to a minor passenger incident." His voice trembled. Clark slammed her fist on the table. "Get me details, now," she barked. She remembered the passenger reports. A teenager, no violence, just a pair of headphones. How had that become a $320 million 0-cents disaster overnight? The CFO cleared his throat. "It's not public yet, but Townsend's team executed a top-down contract freeze. Our leases are inactive until further notice." He exhaled. "We're effectively grounded in that state." A murmur rippled through the room. Clark ran a hand through her hair. "Draft a statement," she ordered. "We need to reassure investors and partners." But she knew it wouldn't be enough. In the quiet corridors of power, a single call had unraveled months of negotiation and billions in growth. The irony stung harder than the financial loss. They'd underestimated the weight of dignity and paid the price in full view of the market. As the boardroom door swung open, Clark took a steadying breath. Outside, a storm was building, and this time it wasn't just PR damage. It was a reckoning for everyone who thought rules and profit always trumped human decency. The only one. Darla had complaint after complaint. Management turned a blind eye. Others shared links to obscure aviation safety boards, where stories of selective enforcement had quietly surfaced. The more people saw, the louder the uproar grew. Celebrities joined in. A well-known actor retweeted the clip with the caption, "No one should be humiliated for simply existing in a space they paid for." An influential civil rights attorney posted, "I'm monitoring this and considering next steps." Across social media platforms, conversation morphed into activism. Hashtags evolved: Darla Watch, Cancel Vista Air, and Naming Rights Matter, as users demanded accountability not just for Darla, but for the entire corporate culture that let her act unchecked. On LinkedIn, Malik's brother Xavier quietly posted a short statement. "My brother followed every rule, yet was targeted because of his appearance. We appreciate everyone who's speaking up. Let's ensure this never happens again." That post went viral in professional circles, prompting aviation executives to scramble. Anonymous Slack channels at Vista Air lit up with panic. Executives shared screenshots of the trending topics, drafted urgent internal memos, and braced for investor calls. Meanwhile, everyday people didn't stop at outrage. Fundraisers sprang up to support Malik's emerging initiative, an app to log and flag discriminatory incidents in travel. Within 24 hours, thousands had donated, each contributor adding a note: "For my niece, for my grandmother, for every silent passenger." By the end of the day, mainstream news outlets had picked up the story, framing it not merely as airport drama, but as a symptom of systemic bias. Panel discussions dissected whole segments of airline procedure, questioning how non-compliance had become a catch-all excuse for targeting Black passengers. Back home in Charlotte, Malik scrolled through the threads with a mixture of disbelief and resolve. Faces he'd never met were rallying behind him, but he stayed quiet, true to his mother's teaching that courage didn't need sound. He let the movement swell around him, knowing that real change often began with someone else's voice echoing your own. And as the night deepened, he closed his laptop with one thought. This was bigger than a flight. It was a reckoning in the making. By dawn, Vista Air's corporate HQ was already buzzing with urgent whispers. Inside the executive suite, CEO Vanessa Clark paced before a wall of monitors showing trending headlines. She tapped a finger against her tablet and finally cleared her throat. "Darla Quinn is suspended immediately," she announced to her senior team. A murmur rippled through the room. The head of in-flight operations, Marcus Lee, glanced up from his briefing notes, brow furrowed. Clark met his eyes. "Her actions violated our code of conduct and exposed us to massive reputational damage. We have to move fast." Within minutes, an all-staff email slipped through employee inboxes and leaked to the media within seconds. The subject line read, "Urgent, suspension of flight attendant Darla Quinn, pending investigation." Inside, the memo was crisp. "Effective immediately, Ms. Darla Quinn is placed on unpaid administrative leave while we conduct a full review of her conduct on flight SKX 1791. We apologize to any passengers affected." Down the hall, HR manager Linda Patel watched as her phone lit up with screenshots of the leak. She pinched the bridge of her nose. This wasn't enough. The murmurs had already grown into a chorus, calling for structural change. Clark swiveled to face her COO, Elena Ruiz. "We need firings, now. No more layers of protection around anyone, even managers." Elena nodded, opening a confidential file labeled Service Culture Failures. "Marcus Lee will be relieved of his duties," she said. His team had filed 24 warnings about unchecked bias in Darla's department, none of which led to action. Within the hour, Marcus Lee's office door closed behind him, a removal notice pinned to his nameplate. Rumor had it his final words were, "I thought I was protecting efficiency." Outside his door, employees exchanged solemn looks. By mid-morning, an internal bulletin circulated. "MS Quinn's suspension is accompanied by the termination of our in-flight operations director, Mr. Marcus Lee, and the dismissal of 2 regional managers overseeing Townsend terminal routes. We do not condone any behavior that undermines customer dignity or abuses authority." The leaked bulletin landed on every major industry website. Aviation bloggers dissected its language. Notice how they frame it as customer dignity. "It's damage control, but it's a start," one wrote. Meanwhile, a veteran flight attendant, Carla Jackson, posted on a private employee forum, "Finally, they're getting it. But we need more than suspensions, we need real training." Her post drew hundreds of comments, a groundswell of voices long muted. In the public domain, Clark released a statement. "We regret the incident aboard flight SKX 1791. Vista Air stands for respectful, equitable service. We are instituting third-party audits, bias awareness training, and a direct passenger feedback loop to ensure this never happens again." Back in Charlotte, Malik saw the headlines flash across his phone. "Vista Air suspends flight attendant, fires top operations execs after racial incident." He allowed himself a small, private nod. It wasn't personal vengeance, just accountability. His mother had taught him that true justice sometimes wore a quiet face. And today, Vista Air's silence had been broken by swift, decisive action. As news anchors debated the reforms, Malik closed his eyes and pictured his mother's warm smile. He knew the road ahead was long. Policies would need enforcement, attitudes would need shifting. But for the first time since boarding that flight, he felt a calm certainty. Real change could begin now. The morning press blitz had waned, but the headlines still burned Malik's phone screen. Vista Air suspends attendant, fires execs, passenger hero or victim. He scrolled past them without stopping, as if their words had no power over him. He'd already said everything he needed to say, once, in a single line posted to his personal blog that morning. You don't need to prove your worth in someone else's space. No flourish, no hashtags, no explanation. Just the truth he'd carried in his chest since boarding that flight. In his quiet bedroom in Charlotte, Malik sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, surrounded by sketches and flowcharts. Lines of Python code streamed across the screen. His new project, the Passenger Rights app. The interface was simple. Users could log incidents, tag locations, and rate crew interactions in real time. He'd drawn inspiration from late-night conversations with his brother Xavier and countless stories he'd read of people like him, small voices drowned in corporate protocol. He paused, rereading the line he'd written. His mother's hand once guided his pencil as he scribbled in her clinic's ledger. Now, his fingertips flew over the keys, translating empathy into functionality. He could feel her pride in every algorithm. Every data point flagged for follow-up. A soft knock sounded at the door. Xavier peeked in, coffee mug in hand and a gentle smile on his face. "You up for lunch?" Malik nodded, stretched his arms overhead, and closed the laptop. "Give me 10 minutes. As he packed away his notes, he remembered how the cabin fell silent when Darla had approached, and how his own silence had echoed louder than any outcry. He'd given up the urge to shout or cry, choosing instead to record and respond later, on his own terms. Downstairs, the kitchen was warm with sunlight. Xavier slid an extra plate across the table. They ate in companionable quiet, sharing glances rather than words. Outside, birds chirped, a reminder that life carried on, relentlessly and beautifully. Back at his desk, Malik opened a new file in his code editor. He typed a comment at the top, Python. Flag incidents based on user input and contextual bias patterns. He smiled at the simplicity and clarity. This was how he'd change the world, not by storming boardrooms, but by building tools that captured truth. He saved his progress and leaned back, eyes closed. The world had watched him walk off that plane. They'd watched Vista Air crumble under the weight of their own injustice. Now, they'd watch his code. Clean lines that might save the next passenger from being invisible. And in that silence, Malik felt more powerful than any headline could convey. Weeks after the storm quelled, Charlotte's spring air felt warmer. Malik stood on the front porch of his childhood home, laptop tucked under one arm, watching his brother Xavier greet guests arriving for the Townsend Family Fund launch. The modest gathering drew local activists, aviation, safety advocates, and a handful of curious neighbors. Evidence that a single act could ripple far beyond a luxury cabin. Inside, Xavier stepped up to a simple podium beneath a banner that read, Townsend Family Fund, Empowering Dignity in Travel. He spoke without grandstanding. My sister's work carries our mother's legacy forward. Through this fund, we'll support families affected by discrimination in transit and invest in community clinics, just as she would have wanted. Applause rippled through the room, genuine and warm. Malik slipped in beside his brother, leaning against the wall and scanning the faces of people nodding at Xavier's words. He felt a quiet swell of pride, not for himself, but for everyone who found a voice through that painful flight. Later, in a sunlit study, Malik settled at his desk. On the screen glowed the latest iteration of his Passenger Rights app, now in public beta, with thousands of active users reporting real-time data on crew interactions, seating disputes, and accessibility issues. He tapped through the dashboard, where heat maps showed trouble spots across airlines and terminals, and trend lines tracked bias patterns over time. He thought back to the first code he wrote in this very room, months ago, when injustice had sparked his determination. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Build tools that speak for those who can't. Now, his code did exactly that, compiling silent stories into actionable insights. Outside, LaDonna Price arrived to visit her godson. She surveyed the app running on the screen, the social media buzz, and the fund's inaugural grant checks. She placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. "You've done your mother proud," she said quietly. Malik nodded, eyes steady. This is just the beginning. Across the state, aviation regulators began citing data from Malik's app during policy reviews. Airlines announced bias awareness training and passenger feedback loops. Townsend Terminal published quarterly equity audits. Vista Air rolled out a comprehensive service culture overhaul rooted in the very metrics Malik's platform provided. On a national stage, Malik and Xavier were invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on travel discrimination. Malik spoke calmly, without theatrics, summarizing his mother's legacy and his own journey. No one should have to choose between silence and dignity. These tools ensure that neither goes unheard. The room sat in attentive quiet, his silence speaking louder than any outcry. Afterwards, legislators thanked him, promising to integrate his work into federal guidelines. That evening, Malik returned home under a violet sky. He walked into his room, glanced at the framed photograph of his mother, smiling in her white coat, and then at the gentle glow of his laptop. He closed the lid softly, as if tucking away a treasured secret. In the hush that followed, he understood that justice wasn't a final act, but a continuous choice, to stay silent until the right moment, then let actions speak. And as the world folded these changes into everyday life, airlines, regulators, communities, a new kind of dignity took flight, one that rose on quiet resolve rather than loud victories. He turned off the light and drifted to sleep with hope in his chest, knowing that legacy, like justice, lived on in what you built next.